After losing my career, my husband demanded equal bills, so I reinvented my entire life. I never thought those words would define the night everything in my life shifted. We're restructuring your position, my manager said, not even looking at me as he slid a termination packet across the table. I remember the sound of my own heartbeat louder than his voice. And then I remember Daniel, my husband, sitting at our kitchen counter later that night, calmly opening his laptop and saying, "If you're not contributing anymore, we need to split everything 50/50. I laughed at first, thinking he was joking, but he wasn't. "You mean the mortgage I helped you qualify for?" I asked softly. He didn't even blink. Exactly. Equal responsibility. That was the moment I realized something had changed in him. Or maybe something had finally revealed itself. 2 nights later, sitting in front of 2 close friends over dinner in our Lincoln Park apartment, he slid a printed spreadsheet across the table like it was a business deal, not a marriage. "Just transparency," he said casually. One of our friends looked uncomfortable. "Dude, isn't that a bit much?" Daniel leaned back and said, "No, it's fair. She has time now." And in that second, I felt myself shrink into someone I didn't recognize. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just said one word. "Fine." And I wish I could explain why that word scared him more than if I had screamed. Before I continue, if this story speaks to your heart, please take a second to like this video and subscribe. It truly helps this channel grow and reach more people who need these stories. And if you feel comfortable, leave a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from and what time it is where you are right now. I read every single one, only if this story truly resonates with you. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 32 years old, and I used to be a marketing director for a Chicago-based tech firm until the day I was told I was no longer needed. And the night Daniel decided I was no longer equal. That night didn't just change my marriage, it changed how I saw myself and what I was willing to accept in silence. And if there is one thing I learned from what happened next, it's that silence can either break you or build something no one sees coming. And now let me take you back to exactly where it all began. It started in our apartment overlooking the gray winter streets of Chicago, the kind of cold that seeps into windows and settles into your bones. Daniel was scrolling through his laptop while I stood in the kitchen still wearing the clothes I had worn to my final meeting. My ID badge still clipped to my bag like I hadn't fully processed. I was no longer employed. "Did they even give you a reason?" Daniel asked without looking up. "They said restructuring," I answered, my voice hollow. He nodded like he was calculating something, not comforting me. Then he turned the screen toward me, an Excel sheet filled with numbers, rent, utilities, groceries, insurance, subscriptions, everything broken down with surgical precision. "I already ran the numbers," he said. "If we split everything evenly, it balances out." I stared at him, waiting for the punchline that never came. "Daniel, I just lost my job today," I said quietly. He finally looked at me, and there was something unfamiliar in his eyes. Not anger, not sadness, something colder, like detachment. "And I'm saying we adjust," he replied, as if I were a variable in a spreadsheet instead of his wife. That night I barely slept. I lay awake listening to the radiator click and hum, thinking about every late night I had supported his consulting career, every time I had told him, "We're a team," and somewhere around 3 a.m. I realized I didn't recognize the man sleeping next to me anymore. Days passed like that, each one quieter than the last, until I started noticing small things. He stopped asking how I was feeling. He stopped offering coffee in the mornings. And when I tried to talk about finding something new, he would simply say, "Just make sure it's your fair share this time." One evening, I overheard him on the phone in the hallway, his voice low and controlled. "No, she's not contributing right now, so I'm restructuring the accounts." I froze behind the door, my hand still gripping a glass of water. I didn't understand what accounts he meant, but something in his tone made my stomach tighten. Later that week, I received an email from a recruiter in Austin, Texas. The subject line read, "We've been following your work." I didn't open it immediately. I just stared at it, while Daniel sat in the living room watching financial news like nothing in our life was shifting beneath the surface. And that's when I felt it for the first time. Not anger, not sadness, something quieter, sharper, like the beginning of a decision I hadn't spoken out loud yet. And then, late that night, while Daniel was in the shower, My phone lit up on the kitchen counter with a second email, unknown sender, subject line, "You're not who he thinks you are." And in that exact moment, the house felt different, like something inside it had just woken up and was watching me back. The kitchen still felt colder than it should have, even with the radiator humming in the corner, that uneven sound filling the silence between Daniel and me, like something alive but indifferent. I remember standing there longer than necessary, staring at the glow of my phone screen as that unknown email stayed open. The words, "You are not who he thinks you are," repeating in my mind like a slow echo I could not shut off. Daniel had already gone back to the living room, the television casting blue light across his face as he reviewed financial charts, completely absorbed, as if nothing in our home had shifted in the last 24 hours. "Are you coming to bed?" I asked softly. My voice careful, almost rehearsed. He did not look away from the screen when he answered, "In a bit. I am just adjusting some things." Adjusting. That word had started to follow me everywhere. The next morning I woke up early, not because I slept well, but because sleep itself had become fragmented, shallow, like I was always half listening for something I could not name. Daniel was already dressed, standing by the kitchen island with a cup of black coffee, scrolling through his phone. "I moved some numbers around last night," he said casually, as if he were talking about groceries, not our lives. I sat down slowly, wrapping my hands around my mug. "What numbers?" I asked. He finally looked at me then, really looked, and there was something measured in his expression, like he had already decided how this conversation would end. "Expenses," he said. "We need to be realistic now, Emily. You do not have a salary anymore." I felt the words hit, not loudly, but precisely, like something being placed carefully on a wound already forming beneath the skin. I wanted to respond, to argue, to remind him of everything we had built together before this moment, but instead I heard myself say, "I understand." And that was the first time I noticed how easily I had started agreeing to things I did not accept. After he left for a client meeting, the apartment became too quiet, the kind of quiet that amplifies memory instead of silence. I found myself standing in front of our hallway shelf, where old photos sat framed, small moments frozen in time. There was one from 3 years ago in Austin, Texas, Daniel and I standing outside a small coffee shop during a weekend trip, both of us laughing because we had gotten lost trying to find a music festival. I looked at that version of us for a long time, trying to understand where the distance had begun. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from my former coworker, Hannah. "Are you okay? People are asking about you after the layoffs. Some think it was not just restructuring." I hesitated before replying. "I am fine, just taking time." But even as I typed it, I knew it was not entirely true. Because what I did not tell anyone was that the layoffs had not felt like a single event. They had felt like the final step in something already eroding quietly for months. I remembered small moments now, things I had dismissed at the time. The meeting where my project proposal had been reassigned without explanation. The client call where Daniel had said, "She will not be leading this anymore," before I had even been told. At the time, I told myself it was coincidence, that I was imagining patterns where none existed. But now, sitting in that quiet apartment, those memories felt different. They felt connected. That afternoon, I decided to go through old emails, not searching for anything specific, just trying to organize my thoughts. But what I found was a thread I had never paid attention to before. Months of financial discussions between Daniel and a private consultant I did not recognize. Phrases like risk exposure, dependency adjustment, and post-income restructuring. I did not fully understand what I was reading, but I understood enough to feel my stomach tighten slowly. When Daniel came home that evening, I did not mention it. Instead, I watched him move through the kitchen, open cabinets, pour water, check his phone, everything precise, everything controlled. "I might take on more consulting clients," he said suddenly, breaking the silence. "It will help stabilize things." I looked at him. "Things are not unstable," I said quietly. He paused, then smiled slightly, but it did not reach his eyes. "You will see," he replied. That night, I could not stop thinking about the phrase in the email. "You are not who he thinks you are." It should have meant nothing. A random message. Spam, maybe. But something about it lingered, like a question waiting for an answer I had not yet found. I went to bed later than him, lying awake as the city lights of Chicago filtered through the blinds in thin lines across the ceiling. At some point, Daniel's phone lit up on the nightstand. He was asleep, but the screen stayed on long enough for me to see a notification preview. Austin contact confirmed. Proceed with phase 2. I did not move. I did not breathe for a moment longer than necessary. Because in that stillness, something inside me shifted again, not loudly, not dramatically, but with the quiet certainty that whatever life I thought I was living was already splitting into something I had not been told the full truth about. The morning after I saw that message on Daniel's phone, I woke up already feeling like I had not fully left the night behind, as if sleep had only carried my body forward but not my mind. The apartment was quiet in that precise way Chicago mornings can be, where even the city outside feels muted under gray skies and distant traffic. Daniel was already in the kitchen when I walked in, his sleeves rolled up, his attention fixed on his laptop screen. He did not look up when he spoke. "We need to talk about the accounts," he said, like he was continuing a conversation I had missed. I paused near the counter, my hand resting on the back of a chair. "What about them?" I asked carefully. He finally looked at me, and this time there was no softness at all. "I moved some things around last night. It is just better this way. Cleaner structure." I sat down slowly. "Cleaner for who?" I asked. A brief silence followed, not tense, just empty, like he was deciding how much truth I was allowed to hear. "For both of us," he said, but his tone made it clear he meant for himself. Then he slid a printed document toward me. It was not an Excel sheet this time. It was an actual agreement draft, titled Post-Income Adjustment Plan. My name was already on it in several places. I felt my fingers go cold as I scanned it. It outlined a redistribution of all shared expenses, but the structure was not equal. It was controlled. Fixed percentages tied to current income contribution, a phrase that reduced everything I had been, everything I had built, into a present absence. "You had a marketing director's salary," Daniel said calmly. "Now you do not. So we adjust accordingly." I looked at him for a long moment, trying to find some trace of the man who used to ask me what I thought before making decisions that affected both of us. "Daniel," I said quietly, "this is not adjustment. This is control." He leaned back slightly, almost amused, but not in a kind way. "It is reality," he replied. "You are not contributing at the same level anymore, Emily. That is just math." The word math landed harder than anything else, because I understood math. I had built campaigns around metrics, growth, return on investment. I had built value from data. And yet here I was, being reduced to a line item in a household ledger. "And if I disagree?" I asked. Daniel did not answer immediately. Instead, he closed his laptop slowly, like the conversation itself was now a transaction he was finishing. "Then you make this harder than it needs to be," he said. There was no anger in his voice. That was what unsettled me most. Not anger, certainty. That afternoon I left the apartment under the excuse of needing air. The streets near Lincoln Park were busy, people moving with purpose, carrying groceries, coffee cups, conversations I could not hear. I found myself walking without direction, passing storefronts I used to notice only in passing. My phone buzzed twice. The first message was from Daniel. "Please review the document." The second was from the unknown email address again. "You are being positioned. Do not accept the framing." I stopped walking when I read that second line. Positioned. It was such a deliberate word. Not fired. Not laid off. Positioned. Like something had been arranged around me without my awareness. I sat on a bench near the lake for a long time, watching the water shift under the wind. I tried to convince myself I was overthinking, that stress was creating patterns where none existed, but then I remembered something I had ignored for months. Daniel's phone calls taken outside the room. His sudden interest in our joint accounts right before my termination. The way he had asked subtle questions about my job stability long before anything had changed. That evening, when I returned home, Daniel was on a call in the living room. His voice was low, controlled. I heard only fragments as I stepped inside. "She is adapting slower than expected. Yes, but she will comply. We just need her to accept the structure." I stopped just outside the doorway. My pulse slowed instead of rising, like my body was trying to understand before my mind did. He turned slightly and saw me. There was a pause, brief, almost imperceptible. Then he ended the call. "You were gone long," he said. I studied his face carefully. "Who were you talking to?" I asked. A faint smile appeared, not warm, not defensive, just practiced. Work, he said, but something in his voice did not match the simplicity of the word. That night, I opened my laptop after he fell asleep. I searched through old emails again, this time not casually, but with focus that felt unfamiliar to me. I found a chain buried under months of unrelated messages. Daniel, a financial restructuring consultant, and a private advisory group based in New York. Their conversations were not about household budgeting. They were about behavioral adjustment, asset alignment, dependency mapping. My name appeared in multiple documents, not as a spouse, but as a subject under income volatility assessment. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. The apartment was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. And then I saw something I had missed before. A scheduled meeting note dated 2 weeks before my termination. Phase 3 alignment. Execute job transition for Emily Carter. My hand stayed still on the desk, but something inside me shifted completely. Not fear, not shock, something colder, awareness. And for the first time since everything began, I understood that my loss of a career had not been an ending at all. It had been a step in a sequence I was never told I was part of. The morning light in Chicago felt different after what I had discovered the night before, not brighter or darker, just heavier, like even the air itself now carried information I could not unlearn. I sat at the edge of the bed for a long time before Daniel woke up, staring at my phone where the email thread still sat open, the words, Phase 3 alignment, execute job transition for Emily Carter, looping through my mind like a sentence that refused to resolve into meaning. Daniel moved around the apartment like nothing had changed, coffee brewing, phone buzzing, suit jacket adjusted with mechanical precision. I have a meeting downtown, he said without looking at me. I nodded slowly, watching him, trying to see him the way I used to, but something in that image no longer fit together cleanly. After he left, I did not move immediately. I sat in silence until the refrigerator clicked and the pipes shifted in the walls, small reminders that life was still continuing, even if mine felt paused. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. I hesitated before answering. Emily Carter? A calm female voice said. Yes, I replied cautiously. There was a short pause on the other end, the kind that feels intentional. My name is Laura Mitchell. I am a senior legal advisor at Franklin and Associates in Austin, Texas. I believe we have been reviewing your professional work for some time. I stood up without realizing it. I am sorry, what? I asked. She continued calmly. Your campaign restructuring models from your time at Northbridge Marketing were flagged by one of our clients. We did not expect the same person to disappear from the industry. I walked toward the window, gripping the edge of the counter. I did not disappear, I said quietly. I was removed. Another pause, shorter this time. Yes, she said, that is one interpretation. Another is that someone ensured you were not visible anymore. The words landed in a way that made my chest tighten, not because they were dramatic, but because they felt precise. Why are you calling me? I asked. Because I am in Chicago today, she replied, and I would like to meet you in person. There are documents you should see. I did not respond immediately. Outside, a bus passed slowly, tires cutting through wet pavement. What kind of documents? I finally asked. Employment transition records, she said, and internal correspondence that includes your name in contexts you were never meant to see. After the call ended, I stood still for a long moment, phone still in my hand, feeling something shift again, not externally, but inside the structure of what I believed was stable. I did not tell Daniel when he returned that evening. I did not tell him about the call or the name Laura Mitchell or the word removed that kept echoing in my mind. Instead, I watched him as he loosened his tie and asked me what I had done during the day. Just walked, I said. He nodded like that answer was expected. Good, he said. Clear your head. We still need to finalize the new expense structure. That word again. Structure. That night, I met Laura Mitchell at a small cafe near River North. She arrived exactly on time, wearing a dark coat, hair pulled back, expression controlled but not cold. She did not shake my hand immediately. Instead, she looked at me for a moment like she was confirming something she already suspected. You look exactly like your portfolio photos, she said finally. I sat down across from her. I do not understand what is happening, I admitted. She opened a folder and slid it across the table. Inside were printed emails, internal notes, and performance evaluations from my previous company. My name appeared repeatedly, but not in the way I remembered. There were annotations next to my projects. Notes like, high influence retention risk, leadership trajectory exceeds containment threshold, and recommend phase out prior to Q2 expansion. I looked up at her. Containment threshold? I repeated. She nodded slightly. That is not standard corporate language, she said. It is advisory language. Private restructuring advisory. I felt a slow chill spread through me. Who authorized this? I asked. Laura hesitated, then said, Your husband's financial consultant was present in several coordination meetings. For a moment, I did not process the sentence. It simply floated there, disconnected from everything else. Then it connected. Daniel. I leaned back slightly. You are saying my husband was involved in my job loss? I asked quietly. Laura did not answer immediately, but she did not deny it either. I am saying, she said carefully, that your employment transition was not isolated. It was part of a larger financial realignment strategy involving shared assets and projected dependency modeling. I felt my hands go still on the table. The cafe around us continued moving, cups clinking, conversations rising and falling, but I could barely hear any of it. Why would anyone do that? I asked, though part of me already knew I should not be asking out loud. Laura closed the folder slowly. Because people are easier to control when their value is redefined before they realize it has been done, she said. I sat there for a long time after she finished speaking. When I finally left the cafe, the air outside felt colder than before. I walked without direction for several blocks, my mind replaying everything, Daniel's spreadsheets, his phrasing, the timing of everything collapsing at once. And then I remembered something small, almost insignificant at the time. A dinner conversation months ago when Daniel had asked me, almost casually, if your income changed drastically, would you still consider the household fair? I had laughed then. I was not laughing now. That night, when I returned home, Daniel was already asleep. I stood in the hallway for a long time, looking at the door of our bedroom, listening to the quiet rhythm of his breathing on the other side. And for the first time, I realized the most unsettling part was not what I had discovered. It was how long I had been living inside it without seeing it at all. The night after I met Laura Mitchell, I did not sleep at all. I lay in bed beside Daniel, listening to his steady breathing, while my mind stayed wide awake, replaying every sentence she had said like a recording that refused to fade. Containment threshold, dependency modeling, employment transition strategy. Those words no longer felt like corporate language. They felt like pieces of a structure I had been placed inside without consent. At some point around 3:00 a.m., I quietly got up and walked into the living room. The city lights outside the window of our Chicago apartment stretched across the glass like distant signals, indifferent and constant. I opened my laptop again, not because I expected to find something new, but because I could no longer tolerate not looking. There was another folder I had not noticed before in Daniel's shared cloud account. It was labeled simply Household Review. Inside were documents with my name on them, but not in the way I used to see my name. One file was titled Behavioral Adaptation Forecast, Emily Carter. I clicked it slowly, my fingers cold on the trackpad. The document was structured like a corporate analysis, but every section was about me, my spending habits, my career dependency ratio, my decision volatility under income stress. I stared at the screen for a long time, trying to convince myself this was some kind of mistake, some kind of misinterpretation. But then I saw something that made my breathing slow, a section labeled Pre-Transition Baseline. It described me not as I was now, but as I had been before I lost my job. It referenced my campaigns, my leadership metrics, my salary trajectory, and then a final line that made my chest tighten. Subject demonstrates high autonomy risk when economically independent. I leaned back in the chair, staring at those words, feeling something inside me shift from confusion into something quieter and more focused. The next morning, Daniel was already awake when I came back into the bedroom. He was adjusting his cufflinks in the mirror. "You did not sleep," he said without turning around. It was not a question. "Neither did you," I replied. He finally looked at me through the mirror. "Work things," he said simply. Then, he added, we should finalize the new structure today. I have already prepared the revised breakdown. I stood there for a moment, watching him. Daniel, I said slowly, who is Laura Mitchell? There was a pause. Not long, but enough to notice. Why? He asked. I held his gaze. Because she knows things about me that I do not understand. He turned around fully now, expression controlled, almost patient. You are overthinking, he said. You are reacting emotionally to financial adjustments. I almost laughed, but it did not come out as humor. It came out as disbelief. Financial adjustments, I repeated. Is that what you are calling this now? He stepped closer, lowering his voice slightly. Emily, you are not thinking clearly. You lost your job, and now you are trying to assign meaning to things that are just practical decisions. I felt something inside me resist the simplicity of his explanation. Practical for who? I asked. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he reached for his phone and checked something briefly, like this conversation had already reached its limit in his mind. We are not doing this right now, he said. I have a meeting. And just like that, he left the room. I stood alone in the quiet space he had just exited, feeling the absence of his explanation louder than his presence. Later that day, I met Laura again. This time, she did not bring a folder. She brought a single printed page and placed it between us on the table without a word. What is this? I asked. It is the original coordination summary, she said. I scanned it slowly. It listed multiple entities, financial consultants, advisory contacts, internal HR references, and then I saw a line that made everything tilt slightly out of place. Primary subject, Emily Carter. Secondary influence modifier, Daniel Whitmore. I looked up. Modifier? I repeated. Laura nodded once. In some private advisory frameworks, individuals are categorized based on their influence over asset stability. You were not the target of the restructuring, Emily. You were Orblase. You were the variable that needed recalibration. I felt my throat tighten slightly. Recalibration, I said quietly. She continued, your career trajectory, your independence, your external visibility, all of it was assessed as a risk factor to a larger financial structure you were connected to. I sat back slowly, trying to process the weight of what she was saying. So I was not removed because I failed, I said. Laura looked at me carefully. No, she replied. You were removed because you were becoming too stable without the system that defined you. The words did not feel real at first. Too stable, as if stability itself had become a problem. As I left the cafe that day, I walked past reflections in the glass windows of downtown Chicago, seeing myself fragmented in passing images, unsure which version of me was being observed and which version was real anymore, and for the first time I did not ask what had happened to my career. I started asking what had actually been happening to me while I thought I was simply building one. The email arrived at 8:17 a.m. While I was still sitting at the kitchen table, untouched coffee growing cold beside me, the Chicago skyline outside our window washed in pale winter light that made everything feel slightly unreal. The subject line was simple, almost indifferent. Clarification required. It was from Daniel. I opened it without hesitation, already knowing this was not a normal message. Inside, there was only one paragraph. Emily, I need you to stop speaking to external consultants regarding household financial structure. Any misinterpretation of internal planning documents is causing unnecessary instability. We are in alignment. Please confirm you understand. I stared at the screen for a long moment, not because I was confused, but because I was finally beginning to see the shape of what I had been inside. I closed the laptop and stood up slowly. When Daniel came back home that evening, he was not alone. I heard voices before the door even opened fully. One was his. The other belonged to a man I had never heard before. She just needs to understand the framework, Daniel was saying as they stepped inside. The other man nodded slightly, carrying a slim briefcase, eyes scanning the apartment quickly, as if assessing structure rather than space. Daniel saw me standing near the hallway and exhaled through his nose, like this was inconvenient timing. Good, he said. You are here? The man beside him extended a hand politely. Emily Carter, he said. I am Marcus Hale, advisory compliance consultant. I did not shake his hand immediately. Compliance for what exactly? I asked. Daniel answered before Marcus could. For ensuring clarity moving forward. That word again. Clarity. I looked at Marcus. You are here because my husband thinks I do not understand my own financial situation? Marcus hesitated, glancing briefly at Daniel before speaking carefully. I am here because there are discrepancies in interpretation of shared asset responsibilities and income dependency ratios. I almost smiled, but it was not humor. It was recognition. You mean I lost my job and now I am a liability, I said. Daniel exhaled sharply. That is not what this is, he said quickly. Stop framing it emotionally. I turned to him slowly. Then frame it clearly, I said. The room went quiet. Even Marcus stopped moving. I could feel the weight of both of them waiting for me to react the way they expected. Confusion, emotion, resistance, but something inside me had already shifted too far for that. I spoke with Laura Mitchell, I said calmly. Daniel's expression changed slightly. Not panic, not yet, but attention. You should not be speaking to her, he said immediately. That was the first time I heard something underneath his voice. Not control, pressure. I nodded slowly. She showed me the documents, I said. The ones where my job transition was planned before I was even informed. Marcus stepped forward slightly. Emily, those documents are misinterpreted. I raised my hand gently, not aggressively, just enough to stop him. No, I said. Let me finish. Silence again. I could feel Daniel watching me differently now, as if recalculating something that had moved outside his expected range. I continued, my voice steady. I understand what this structure is now. It is not about expenses. It is not about fairness. It is about repositioning me within a system I was never told I was part of. Daniel's jaw tightened. That is not accurate, he said. I looked directly at him. Then explain why my employment status was discussed with external consultants before I was ever notified by my company. He hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, but it was enough. Marcus cleared his throat. Emily, the goal was risk mitigation, he said carefully. I turned toward him. Risk to what? I asked. He did not answer immediately. That silence answered more than words ever could. Daniel stepped forward slightly, trying to regain control of the room. You are turning this into something it is not, he said. We are trying to stabilize household conditions. I nodded slowly. Household conditions, I repeated. Then I looked at both of them. So let me stabilize this for you, I said quietly. Daniel frowned. What does that mean? I took a breath. Not because I was emotional, because I was finally choosing precision over reaction. It means I have read everything, I said. Every document, every email, every classification that includes my name without my knowledge. Marcus shifted slightly, uncomfortable now. Daniel's expression tightened. You do not understand the context, he said. I shook my head once. No, I said. I do. That is the problem. I walked to the table and placed my phone down gently. Not dramatically. Not as a threat. Just placement. I understand that my career was not just removed, I continued. It was evaluated. I understand that my financial independence was categorized as instability. I understand that decisions about my life were discussed like variables in a model I never consented to be part of. Daniel's voice rose slightly. Emily, stop. I looked at him. Not sharply, just directly. He stopped speaking. That surprised even him. I continued. I am not angry, I said. I am not confused anymore either. Marcus looked between us. What are you saying exactly? He asked. I turned to him. I am saying I want all records that include my name, my employment history, and any advisory documentation related to me, formally disclosed. Silence. Daniel finally laughed once, short and disbelieving. You cannot request that, he said. That is not how any of this works. I looked at him for a long moment, then explained to me, I said softly, why it has been working without me knowing. No one answered. And in that silence, something shifted again. Not in me this time, in them. Because for the first time, I was not asking what had been done. I was stating that I already knew. The silence in the apartment did not last long after Marcus left. It never did anymore. It had become fragile, like glass that only looked intact from a distance. Daniel stood near the kitchen counter, his hands resting on the edge, as if he needed physical grounding. His expression was no longer calm. It was controlled in a different way now, tighter, sharper. "You are escalating something that does not need to be escalated," he said. His voice was lower than before, but there was pressure behind it now. I remained seated at the table, my hands folded in front of me, not shaking, not moving. "I am not escalating anything," I said quietly. "I am asking for transparency." He let out a short breath, almost a laugh, but it had no humor in it. "Transparency," he repeated. "Emily, you are reacting to fragments of information you do not understand." I looked at him carefully. "Then explain it," I said again. A pause, longer this time. Not comfortable, not rehearsed. Daniel walked a few steps toward the window, then back again, like the room had become too small for him. "You met with legal consultants," he said finally. "People who specialize in creating narratives out of internal corporate language. That is what they do. They reinterpret things to sound alarming." I nodded slowly. "So you are saying all of it is coincidence?" He turned toward me immediately. "Yes," he said. "Too fast, too clean." And in that exact moment, I knew something had started to break between his words and his certainty. That evening, the breaking became visible. It started with a phone call. Daniel stepped into the hallway, but this time he did not close the door fully. I could hear his voice clearly. "This is not stable anymore," he said sharply. A pause. "No, she is not following the structure." Another pause, shorter. I did not expect external consultation. His tone shifted then, less controlled. "You said she would not escalate this." I sat very still at the table, not moving, not reacting, just listening. When he came back into the room, his face had changed slightly. Not anger yet. Something closer to frustration mixed with uncertainty. "We are done discussing this," he said. I looked at him. "Who were you speaking to?" I asked again. This time he did not answer immediately. He looked at me for a long moment, then said, "This is exactly what I mean. You are inserting meaning where there is none." But his voice did not fully match his words anymore. The next morning, I received a message from Laura Mitchell. "We need to meet again. Urgent." I arrived at the cafe near River North before her. The streets were wet from early rain, reflections of traffic lights stretching across the pavement like broken lines of color. When she arrived, she did not sit immediately. She placed her phone face down on the table and looked at me. "There is something you need to understand," she said. I did not speak. "The advisory group your husband is connected to is not operating in isolation," she continued. "There are internal disagreements forming." I frowned slightly. "What kind of disagreements?" She hesitated. That hesitation was new. "Power allocation disputes," she said finally. "Your case was part of a larger model, but now different parties are interpreting your behavior differently." I leaned forward slightly. "My behavior?" I repeated. She nodded. "Your refusal to comply with the expected financial adjustment, your contact with external legal interpretation, your questions." I sat back slowly. "So I am not even a person in this system," I said quietly. Laura looked at me carefully. "You are," she said, "but you are also a variable that has stopped behaving predictably." That night, everything shifted without me doing anything at all. It started with Daniel's phone ringing repeatedly on the kitchen counter while he was in the shower. I saw the screen light up once, twice, then again. Different names, different numbers. He came out and saw me looking at it. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he stepped forward quickly and picked it up. "This is unnecessary," he said into the phone. I could hear the voice on the other end faintly. Fast, tense. Daniel walked into the hallway. I followed without thinking. His voice rose slightly. "No, you do not understand the exposure risk." Another pause. "She has already spoken to external advisory." I stopped walking. He turned slightly when he realized I was behind him. The conversation ended abruptly. He lowered the phone. "You are not supposed to be involved in this," he said. I looked at him. "In what exactly?" I asked. He did not answer. Instead, his phone buzzed again immediately. This time he did not pick it up right away. It kept vibrating on the counter, relentless. Then another phone call came, and another. I watched as Daniel stood there, suddenly no longer composed, no longer in control of the rhythm of communication he had maintained for so long. He finally answered one of them. "This is becoming unstable across all nodes." The voice on the other end said loudly enough that I could hear fragments. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. "I told you she is not compliant," he said. I stayed still, watching, listening, and then I understood something important. They were not speaking about me as a person anymore. They were speaking about me as a disruption, a system variable that no longer followed expected outcomes. When Daniel finally ended the call, he did not look at me immediately. He stood there in silence, phone still in his hand. For the first time, I saw something beneath his control. Not confidence, not strategy, uncertainty. "What is happening, Daniel?" I asked softly. He did not answer, and in that silence I realized something even more important. I was no longer the only one trying to understand what this was. They were starting to lose control of it too. The silence after Daniel's last phone call did not disappear. It settled into the apartment like weight, thick and unavoidable, as if even the walls were now listening for something neither of us could name. He stood near the kitchen counter for a long time, phone still in his hand, staring at the screen without touching it. For the first time since I had known him, Daniel did not look like someone managing a situation. He looked like someone trying to understand one. But I was no longer standing inside that rhythm with him. I had already stepped slightly outside of it. The next morning, I woke up before him and did something I had not done in weeks. I made coffee slowly. I did not check emails. I did not open documents. I simply stood by the window and watched Chicago wake up beneath a pale winter sky. The lake looked distant and still, like it had no interest in what people were doing above it. When Daniel entered the kitchen, he stopped briefly when he saw me already awake. "You are up early," he said. I nodded. "I am going to Austin next week," I said quietly. He paused, not in surprise, but in calculation. "Why?" he asked. I looked at him without emotion. "Because I need space where I am not defined by whatever system this is." He frowned slightly. "That is not necessary," he said immediately. "We are stabilizing everything here." I almost smiled at the word stabilizing. It no longer meant anything to me. "You are stabilizing your side of it," I said. He stepped closer to the counter. "Emily, you are making decisions based on incomplete information." I met his gaze. "Then give me complete information," I said. There was a pause, longer than usual. Not defensive, not rehearsed, just empty. "I cannot do that right now," he said finally. That was the first honest sentence I had heard from him in a long time. I booked my flight that afternoon. Not because I had a plan, but because staying felt more uncertain than leaving. When I told Laura Mitchell, she did not try to stop me. Instead, she nodded as if she had expected this outcome. "Austin is where the advisory center is most active," she said. "If you are going there, you will likely see the structure more clearly." I did not ask her what she meant anymore. I was starting to understand that some answers only made sense once you were already inside them. The flight felt longer than it was supposed to feel. Not because of distance, but because my mind no longer stayed still. It kept moving through fragments of everything I had learned. By the time I landed in Austin, the air felt different against my skin. Warmer, but sharper somehow, like clarity had temperature. A driver was already waiting at the airport. He held a sign with my name on it, simple and direct. "Miss Carter?" he asked. I nodded. "Laura asked me to bring you directly," he said. The city passed outside the window in soft motion. Wide roads, glass buildings, light reflecting in ways Chicago never did. Everything felt slightly more open, but also more exposed. We stopped in front of a low building near downtown. No signage that explained anything, just a clean entrance and a quiet lobby. Inside, Laura was already waiting. "You came faster than expected," she said. I sat across from her. "I do not think I had a choice," I replied. She studied me for a moment. "You always had a choice," she said softly. "You just did not have visibility." I leaned forward slightly. "Then show me everything," I said. This time she did not hesitate. She opened a sealed folder and placed it on the table between us. Inside were layers of documentation I had never seen before. Not just emails, not just financial summaries, but structural maps, flow charts of decision influence. My name appeared again, but now I understood how to read it differently, not as a subject, not as a problem, as a node inside a network of decisions that extended far beyond my personal life. "This is not about you alone," Laura said quietly. It never was. I looked at the diagrams. Lines connected entities I had never heard of, advisory firms, financial intermediaries, restructuring consultants, and then I saw something that made me stop. Daniel's name appeared not at the center but as an intermediary connection point. "He is not the origin," I said slowly. Laura shook her head. "No," she said. "He is part of the transmission layer." I sat back, the weight of that sentence settling in. Transmission layer. Not author. Not architect. Just conduit. That night I stayed in Austin alone in a small hotel room overlooking a quiet street. I did not call Daniel. He did not call me. For the first time in a long time there was space between us that did not feel like tension, but like distance that was finally becoming visible. I thought about everything I had believed I had lost. My career, my structure, my certainty, and for the first time I began to see that what I had lost might not have been removed at all. It might have been redirected, not toward destruction, but toward something I had not yet learned to recognize as my own path. And as I sat there in the quiet of a city I barely knew, I realized something that did not feel like victory or loss, but something simpler. I was no longer waiting to be defined by someone else's system. I was beginning, slowly, to step outside of it entirely. The morning light in Austin did not feel like the light in Chicago. It did not press against me the same way. It did not carry memory in its weight. It simply existed, warm and indifferent, spilling across the hotel window as I stood there holding a cup of coffee I barely tasted. For a long time, I just watched the city move below, people crossing intersections, cars turning slowly, life continuing in ways that no single story could interrupt. My phone sat on the table behind me, silent. No messages from Daniel. No more structured emails. No more explanations wrapped in language that no longer felt human. Just silence. And for the first time, that silence did not feel like abandonment. It felt like space. I met Laura one final time that afternoon. She did not bring documents this time. She brought clarity. We sat outside near a small courtyard cafe, the kind of place where nothing felt urgent. "The structure is collapsing internally," she said calmly, stirring her coffee. I looked at her. "Because of me?" I asked. She shook her head immediately. "No," she said, "because it was never stable to begin with." That answer stayed with me longer than anything else. When I asked about Daniel, she hesitated for the first time. "He is no longer in an active advisory position," she said carefully. I did not ask what that meant. I did not need to. Some things, once seen clearly, do not require translation. That evening, I received a short message from him. Not structured, not formal, just one line. I did not see it clearly. I read it once, then again, and I did not reply. Not because I was angry, but because for the first time I understood that responding was no longer part of the system I was in. I stayed in Austin longer than I planned. I started walking in the mornings without checking the time. I ate slowly. I slept without waking at intervals of doubt. I took consulting calls from small companies who had no idea who I used to be in Chicago, and for the first time in years, I did not introduce myself as someone in transition. I simply introduced myself as Emily Carter. Nothing added, nothing removed. One afternoon, I visited a small office overlooking the river where a local startup team had asked for help with their strategy model. The room was simple: white walls, open windows, quiet air. A young founder looked at me and said, "We heard you used to work in high-level restructuring environments." I paused for a moment, then replied, "I used to think I was inside one." He laughed lightly, not understanding, but I did not correct him. I did not need him to understand the past. I only needed him to understand the present. Back in Chicago, I later learned through a short message from Laura that Daniel had stepped away from all advisory involvement. There was no dramatic explanation, no collapse, no confrontation. Just a quiet withdrawal from a system that no longer had clarity for him. The same system that had once defined my value now no longer included either of us in the same way. There was no victory in that, no defeat either. Just consequence unfolding in its own natural rhythm. Months passed. Seasons changed without announcement. I returned to Chicago once, briefly, to collect the remaining things I had left behind. The apartment felt smaller than I remembered, not because it had changed, but because I had. I stood in the kitchen for a long time before leaving, running my hand along the counter where so many conversations had once taken place, conversations I now understood differently. Before I left, I placed something small on the table, a simple notebook I had carried with me in Austin, not filled with plans or strategy anymore, just notes, observations, thoughts written in my own hand, without structure imposed by anyone else. I did not leave a message. I did not need one. I closed the door behind me and did not look back. Now, when I think about everything that happened, I no longer see it as something that broke me or rebuilt me. I see it as something that revealed where I ended and where everything else began. There are moments in life where love, control, fear, and identity become so tightly woven that you cannot separate them while you are inside them. You only understand the pattern once you are outside it. And if you are listening to this, maybe carrying something of your own, I want to say this gently, without urgency. There is always a point where silence stops being endurance and starts becoming permission. Permission to see clearly. Permission to step back. Permission to remember yourself before you became someone else's interpretation of your value. If this story reached you in a quiet place inside your life, I hope it reminded you that awareness is not an ending. It is the beginning of return. Thank you for being here, for staying with me through every part of this journey, for listening not just to the story, but to the spaces between the words. If you feel moved, you can like this video, subscribe, or simply share your thoughts below. But more than anything, I just hope you feel a little less alone than you did before you started listening. And if I could leave you with one simple truth from all of this, it would be this: your value is never defined by the system that misunderstands you. Thank you for sharing this moment with me. I will remember it quietly, and I hope in some small way you will too.